We are here to start the origin and evolution of novels, the different kinds of novels. You can call it fiction. Like you have fictional characters coming there. You will definitely have a plot. You will definitely have number of characters. But the main focus would be definitely on the development of characters more to a plot. In drama, you take a plot as a soul of the drama, but here what happens is it's more to plot. You have the character developments, how the character grows. You have autobiographies that will be concentrating again on the heroes or the heroines or the characters that is coming there. Likewise, you have the many kinds of fictions coming, as we have discussed many kind of poetry in our last semester. In this we are going to deal about different kinds of fictions or the different kinds of novels we have to deal and we have to get acquainted with. So now, the origins of novels. The novel originated in the 18th century after the Italian word novella, which was used for stories in the medieval period. So the novella originated, the novel. So novel, anyhow, you take the word essay, it's from the word which means to attempt. Essay means to attempt. Likewise, you have novel. It is from the Italian word novella, something new. It denotes something new, that is novella. The novel originated in early 18th century after the Italian word novella, which was used for stories in the medieval period. So new kind of stories in the medieval period. Its identity has evolved and now it's considered to mean a work of prose fiction over 50,000 words. Now, as it is evolved and reached today, you can define a work of fiction, or if you have a prose work which exceeds 50,000 words, it could be even called a novel, or it could be called a fiction, but you have certain ingredients that should carry along with this 50,000 words. Novels focus on character development more than plots. What I told you, when you take drama, they will be discussing and like concentrating more on plot, but here the novels are concentrating on the characters, development of characters, the inner psyche. Exactly, in any genre it is a study of human psyche. So any kind of novels you take, you have science fictions, you have metafictions, you have magical realisms inside fiction. So all these kinds of psychological fiction, you have romantic fiction. So any kind of fiction you are taking, they will be dealing with the inner psyche of man, the inner mind of the characters. So it is a development of characters rather than the development of plot you have in a novel. So the beginnings, the ancestors of the novel were Elizabethan prose fiction and French heroic romances. So you could take the first ancestor happens to be the French heroic romances, and now again you have Elizabethan. If you take from the Elizabethan, if you take the British fiction, so it is purely from the Elizabethan prose fiction, which were long narratives about contemporary characters who behave nobly. So it is in romances, and you have heroic romances means you have heroic characters here. You have not like ordinary man as the hero. You have noble characters, knights, kings. All these comes as the characters inside those like romances. The ancestors of the novel were Elizabethan prose fiction and French heroic romances, which were the long narratives about contemporary characters who behave nobly, about the contemporary characters who behave nobly. So we have the characters who the writers saw in the ages, and they behaved so much nobly. The novel came into popular awareness towards end of the 1700s due to a growing middle class, or more leisure time to read and more money to buy books now. Apart from this, now the characterization changed due to the medieval influence, like the middle class influence, you could say. The novel came into popular awareness. Now it was becoming somewhat popular than the drama or the poetry. So it was becoming more popular, and the reason is towards end of the 1700s, due to a growing middle class with more leisure time to read and money to buy books, and the middle class had more leisure time to read books, and even they had enough money to purchase books. That was one reason it was becoming more popular. And public interest as a human character led to the popularity of autobiographies, biographies, journals, diaries, and memoirs. So you had interest in writing autobiographies. People had interest in reading as well as writing autobiographies, biographies, journals, diaries, and memoirs. So memoirs and diaries, almost you have your day-to-day happenings, you will just do one and you will carry out into a book. So English novels. Now we move on. After the beginnings, we are just getting on with English novels. The English novels concern themselves with complex middle class characters struggling with immorality and circumstances. So now English novels. Now if you move away from the Elizabethan prose fiction and the French heroic romances, now it's the time of English novels. And what are the ideas that were contained inside the English novels? The early English novels concerned themselves with the complex middle class characters. So it is now middle class complex characters are the problem. People who are dealing with the different problems in their life. So the situations are becoming so complex. So the characters dealing with the complex situations of their life. The early English novels concerned themselves with the complex middle class characters struggling with their morality and circumstances. So the questions were toward the plot were questioning towards the morality and the circumstances in which they lived. So the characters, the settings all became very important. Now the first one, Pamela, a series of fictional letters written in 1714 by Samuel Richardson, is considered the first real English novel. So now you have a series of letters that were drafted by Samuel Richardson for the year 1740, and the series of letters were put together under the title Pamela, and this happens to be the first English novel. So it is Pamela, a series of fictional letters written in it's not real letters. You have fictional characters put there, fictional letters, and characters and stories are weaved in together, where the complexities of characters come out and even a storylines happens. And Pamela, a series of fictional letters written in 1741 by Samuel Richardson, is considered the first real English novel. And other novelists include Daniel Defoe. So once we go through this, at least try to get a summary of all these and read it out. I know it is very hard to, you will be reading all the books together, but it's better fine you at least go one or two books you can read as the novels as such, but others better find ways to read out the summaries at least. So other early novelists include Daniel Defoe, who wrote Robinson Crusoe and the Mole Flanders. Now you have Daniel Defoe, who came with Robinson Crusoe 1719. In school classes you might have read about Robinson Crusoe, and Mole Flanders 1722. Although his characters were not fully realized enough to be considered full-fledged novels. So even though these characters cannot be considered to be full-fledged characters in novels. Now Jane Austen, you have the great writer coming up. Jane Austen is author of Pride and Prejudice 1812 and Emma 1816, considered the best English early novels of manners. Now we are introduced to English novels of manners. As our syllabus concerns, we have to see what is like novel of manners, psychological novel, historic novel, Gothic novel. So all the kinds of novels, scientific novel, science fiction, all these we have to see. So the one introduced with Jane Austen is the novel of manners, where you have the examples like Pride and Prejudice and Emma. So sentimental novels you have again. So all these we have to see as we advance this. So English novels concern themselves with complex middle class characters. So once the English novel came up after the prose of Elizabethan time and even the French romances, you have the English novels coming in with the complex characters and with the middle class characters even coming there. And you have Pamela as a set of series of letters written by Samuel Richardson for the year 1741, and this was compiled together, fictional letter, like it's a created letters in the series, and now they are put up to the first English novel. Then you have Mole Flanders and Robinson Crusoe by Daniel Defoe, and again you have Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice, and Emma. And novels. Now after 18th century, we are moving on 19th century. So during the Victorian times, the first half of the 19th century was influenced by romanticism of the previous era. So by 16 after Elizabethan, you have the romantic time. So after the influence of romantic era, you have the Victorian era. So what you are learning in your history classes, like a history, you will come to know about the ages through which literature moves. From the Chaucer, you move on from Middle Ages. From Old English, you move on to the Middle English. Then you have Elizabethan era, you have Romantic era, you have Victorian era, you have the 19th century, and again you move on to the 20th, the modern era. So the first half of the 19th century was influenced by the romanticism of the previous era. The focus was now on nature and imagination rather than intellect and emotion. Now you move on. Every era they have the different characteristics and like the peculiarities of that era coming up. So now in the half of the 19th century was influenced by romanticism of the previous era. So half of the 19th century you could see the romanticism coming up, the influence of romanticism in the previous era. From the previous era, the focus was now on nature and imagination. So whenever you take romanticism, it is daffodils. You can take a pretty good example as daffodils by William Wordsworth, and so that is nature and imagination. So both are clubbed together, and that is called as romanticism, rather than intellect and emotion. So metaphysical, if you take a metaphysical, it is intellect and emotion. So rather than intellect and emotion, the half of the 19th century had the novels which had the focus on romanticism, where you focused on nature and imagination, rather than more focusing on intellect or emotion. And Gothic is a strain of the romantic novel with its emphasis on supernatural. Now, one of the features of romantic novels is romantic age and romantic novels is that it's a Gothic elements. Gothic is supernatural elements coming up inside the stories. And you have the movies, Malayalam movies, Manichitrathara, and that is Gothic elements coming, the supernatural elements coming there. Predam Pishajakolla movies, if you're taking, so that is the Gothic elements coming there. So you focus on not just romanticism, you have some kind of supernatural magical elements coming there, and mystic elements coming there. Famous novels include Jaina by Charlotte Bronte, and the prototype of many succeeding novels about and novels about the governors and mysterymen. Now about the governors and mysterymen. So it's about mysterymen. So you have the Gothic elements coming inside the novels. And again you have Wuthering Heights, the Gothic romance by Emily Bronte, and the Scarlet Letter, the House of the Seven Gables, Gothic romantic tales by Nathaniel Hawthorne, and about Puritanism and guilt and suffering and redemption. All these kind of ideas comes inside those kind of Gothic novels and romantic novels. And again, Moby Dick, Herman Melville's work on nature of good and evil. Now there's a question of what is good and what is evils. So again, there is a Gothic elements coming up inside Moby Dick by Herman Melville. And again, now you move on to, after this half of the century, you move on typically to the Victorian novels. And so though it was the 19th century, now that Victorian like a ferment could be seen only after the middle of the era. And the Victorian novels, the novel became established as a dominant literary form during the reign of Queen Victoria of England, 1837 to 1901. So during the years 1837 and to 1901, it was a period of Queen Victoria, and that time the novels had a tremendous growth. And Victorian novel is portrayed middle class, virtuous heroes responding to society and learning wrong from right through a series of human errors. Now you have virtuous heroes, you have heroes coming there, and the peculiar of heroes is that they responded to the situations in society, they responded to what is happening in the society, and there is a kind of intellect growing within them, and learning wrong from right through a series of human errors. So they were learning from through a series of errors they are learning what is good and what they have to do rightly. So, and virtuous heroes responding to society and learning wrong from right through a series of human errors. And Sir Walter Scott published 3 volumes of novels and ingeniously made them affordable for the general public by making them available for purchase in monthly installments. So you have Walter Scott coming up, and with a series of 3 volumes of novels ingeniously made them affordable for the general public, for the people to read. That was his main purpose, and he was trying to distribute in installments even. This marketing tactic led to writing innovation of sub-climaxes as a way to leave readers wanting for each month. So sub-climaxes, as our serials will put on, and our like a continuing movies, they will leave with the questions and again you will be waiting for the next month to read it again and again. Notable Victorian authors include Charles Dickens, considered the best English Victorian novelist, wrote A Christmas Carol, and Lewis Carroll, and who wrote Alice Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. All these were Lewis Carroll and Charles Dickens. So these were the 2 notable writers during the Victorian era and the Victorian novelist. And this is Charles Dickens coming up. Then you have Walter Scott, and again you have Lewis Carroll. And realism and naturalism in the novels of fiction. The rise of industrialization in the 19th century precipitated a trend toward writing the depicted realism. So when it was wake of industrialization, there happened to be the writers depicted realism inside the novels. Novels began to depict characters who were not entirely good or bad, rejecting the idealism and romanticism of the previous genre. So if your characters are too good, that is idealism. You say moral heroes, you have to learn from them. And if you say too bad, too good, too bad, then again you will be focusing on the characters alone. So this trend was even breaking away, and novels began to depict characters who were not entirely good or bad, rejecting the idealism and romanticism of the previous genre. So the characters, you cannot say they are too bad and too good. You can just judge people like that. And so this kind of realism was paving way, and they were keeping away romanticism and idealism. And realism evolved quickly into naturalism, which portrayed harsher circumstances and pessimistic characters rendered powerless by forces of the environment. Now, realism. And after this naturalism, it was paving way for realism. Realism evolved quickly into naturalism, which portrayed harsher circumstances. So the characters were not too good or characters were not too bad, but they were living exactly in the harsher circumstances and pessimistic. They had pessimistic circumstances to overcome. Not every time you can be optimistic. So they were pessimistic characters, rendered powerless by forces of the environment. They can't be so powerful. You cannot pull up like a tree upside down. So your characters cannot be so ideal, cannot be so just full of power and valor and strength. So it can be powerless characters, so that we portrayed during this time. And again, you have the features of realism and naturalism rather than idealism and romanticism. And naturalist novelists include Uncle Tom's Cabin and by Harriet Beecher Stowe, which was a major catalyst for American Civil War, and Tom Sawyer, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and the latter of which is considered the great American novel written by Mark Twain. So Mark Twain novels, you have The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, the latter of which is considered the great American novel. So this time in America, the novels began to come up with the features of not idealism and romanticism, but even realism and naturalism. And now the modern novels. The 20th century is divided into two phases of literature: modern literature 1900s and 1945, and contemporary literature 1945 to present, which is also called the postmodern. So you have two eras coming up after the Victorian. One is modern era, and the other one is postmodern era, of the contemporary era in which we are living right now. The 20th century is divided into two phases of the literature: modern literature 1900 to 1945, and contemporary literature 1945 to the present, also referred to as postmodern. The characters in modern and contemporary novels question the existence of God. Now there is again another idea coming up: existence of God, the supremacy of human reason, the nature of reality. Novels from this era reflected great events such as the Great Depression, World War II, Hiroshima, the Cold War, and communism. What happened in the world, they were really depicting it inside the novels. And famous modern novels include To the Lighthouse by the English novelist and earliest, and essays Virginia Woolf, Ulysses by Irish novelist and short story writer James Joyce, All Quiet on the Western Front, the most famous World War I anti-novel by German novelist and journalist Erich Maria Remarque, and The Sound and the Fury by American novelist and short story writer William Faulkner, which depicts the decline of South after the Civil War. So what has happened in the world, they have clearly depicted in the novel. So again, it's a time of realism and naturalism inside the novels rather than romanticism and idealism. And postmodern novels. Realism and naturalism paved way into postmodern surrealistic novels with the characters. Now you have this realism and naturalism. So realism is there, naturalism is there, and they have paved way to postmodern surrealistic novels with the characters that way more reflective. So you have surrealistic characters that are more reflective. They will reflect always like giving morals and teaching the citizens about what is happening in the world. And the postmodern novels include magical realism, metafiction. Now in the postmodern novels, you can find the features like magical realism, metafiction, the graphic novel. Everything is portrayed very clearly, graphically. It asserts that man is ruled by a higher power and that the universe cannot be explained by reason alone. Modern novels exhibit a full playfulness of language. A risk lands on traditional values and experimentation with how time is conveyed in the story. And postmodern novels include The Color Purple by Alice Walker, In Cold Blood by Truman Capote, and novel fiction by Rhodes by Alex Haley, and Fear of Flying by Eria Jong, and the leading magical novelist 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. All these novels you have in the postmodern era. This is a glimpse about the evolution of English novels as such, where you will again you have some American novels again mentioned here. So this is about the novels. And now after this we will have to see the different kinds of novels with examples and writers and the kind of features coming inside that. So for today we can do with this. Okay, then thank you.